Alright, everybody, how are you doing today? Steve the Amateur Historian, as promised, I'm here. I'm a little stiff in the back and stiff in the stomach, I think from exercising yesterday, so hopefully I won't get too comfortable and the periodic twitches and stretches won't be too big of a distraction. But if they are, well, you just have to deal with them, alright? So, as promised, I told you all I was going to come back to you guys at some point shortly after taking my film down that I posted my feature that I just recently finished editing, didn't necessarily just recently shoot, and I posted it to this channel for 10 days, giving various people, whoever was out there who wanted to see it, the opportunity to come and watch it, and got some decent viewing for what it was. Got some positive comments. Thank you for that feedback. And I'm just kind of leading in a little slowly, trying to let a few more people come in if they so choose. I wanted to post a little thing that said like, oh, hey, I'm gonna have a live stream at, around this point today. And for some reason that won't work on this camera or on this phone. It only allowed me to make it an untitled or a private or a public one, but it didn't let me schedule it, which it does do on my Mac, so I could have done this on my Mac, but the video quality would have been horrible. So I just had to start it when I wanted to start it. So this is the story behind my recently completed feature film, Till I Found You. And try to get through as much as I can. I tend to be really sore in the muscles early in the day. I've been doing a lot of like exercising, trying to re-strengthen myself, rebuild my muscles, and right now I'm just knotted through here. But yes, the film I just recently finished, Till I Found You, released 2020. And, I love other, whenever somebody else makes a film, I always love hearing the backstory. How did you come up with this? How did you make that happen? How did all of this come together? I always love those little backstories behind film. So of course I'd be totally cool doing that for you guys as well. Now, Till I Found You was it was a long time coming. I first really officially started getting into film, like film, not just like making videos with friends and stuff like that. I first started really getting into it. I went back to school for it, and in the summer of 2012 was when I first started like really getting into it. And from pretty much the spring of 2012 till late 2015, that was all I was doing, was making movies. If I wasn't actually shooting something, I was writing a script, I was planning a film, I was doing post-production stuff, I was editing, I was figuring out where I was going to present it, all that stuff. Like, there was not really a break. The only real break I had was end of 2014 into the start of 2015, and that was because I got really sick out of nowhere, and it turned out I just had really low vitamin D. And that's why I was feeling sick all the time, so they gave me these big old horse pills to take, and I took them, and over the course of a few weeks, I was back to my normal self. But after making movies that long, and then suddenly not for, like 4 months, I was itching to make a movie again, and I just sat down and I just went crazy, and I wrote my first feature film and shot it, and it turned out great. But it turned out better than I thought it was going to. Even as I was editing it, it turned out better than I thought it was going to be while I was editing it. And for all the benefits of that, the frustrating aspect of it was my first feature, so all these other films I'd done, there would be 2 shooting days, 3 shooting days, maybe 4 or 5 shooting days, but this film had 12. Obviously, most feature films have longer shooting days, but I'm pretty good at getting a good chunk of stuff done in one day, especially if everything falls into line. Excuse me, a little stuffy today. I'm going to try not to do that too much, because that's a little bit of a deterrent. And my last feature film, the one I'm currently discussing, was called Runaway Highway. That was the name I gave to it. And, 12 or so shooting days. We started at the end of May 2015, and I gave us till I wanted to have it done at the latest, I wanted it to be done in mid-July. That gave us like 10 weeks, or not 10 weeks, but it gave us about 7 weeks, 7 or 8 weeks. And, to do 12 shooting days and giving us almost as many weeks, it should have been easy to do. But the scheduling conflicts came. And that happens when you make no budget film. Like, if you have somebody who's willing to come and work for you for, a small amount, and then, their day job comes calling, or a film that's going to offer them a lot more pay comes on that day, and they say, sorry, I got to do this, you have to be prepared for that stuff. So, we had 18 total canceled shooting days. 18, and there was only 12. So, it was 1.5 cancellations for every shooting day we had. It ended up not being till the end of November before we finally actually got the film done, and it became just such a stressful thing because it was turning into, because it was supposed to be a summertime film, it ran over into the fall, and I started really worrying, when we got down to those last like 2 shooting days we had to do. I was really getting worried. Is this gonna get done? And we got so lucky. The Lord shined upon us. We had 2 shooting days in November, and they managed to both look like just kind of regular days. They didn't look like usually what you'd think a November day would look like in the Pacific Northwest. They managed to stay dry for us. It was amazing. In fact, on the very last day of shooting, because it was mostly exteriors, so we couldn't shoot when it rained, it was just kind of a hazy overcast most of the day, which was fine because a lot of what we shot was supposed to look like it was done in the morning. And I swear, we filmed all day, and we finally got finished. It was a wrap on the film, and within 15 minutes of that wrap, it started downpouring. So even for all the stress, everything kind of fell in line in the end. But by the time I got that film done, I was so wiped out. For the first time, I needed a break. And I had just gotten back together with my girlfriend, and I wanted to see that through, and I didn't want there to be a lot of distractions in my life. I didn't want to be pushing her aside, like, honey, I'm working on my next movie, I'll talk to you later, when we had literally broken up, and for 3 years, I was just desperate to get her back, and now we finally were back together. I didn't want to be a dud of a boyfriend again, like I kind of ended up being the first time. And with the exhaustion, I just wanted to take some time. And, it took a really long time to finally get Runaway Highway done because I wanted it to be perfect. Kind of like this film I just got done. And what I was kind of hoping would be maybe 6 to 8 months turned into, 2.5 years. And one of the issues was, try as I might, when I got that first feature done and it was so well received, I kind of let my ego get in the way of me a little bit of trying to do a film. Because I'd come up with an idea and I'd get really invested into it, and I'd organize it, and I'd start screenwriting, and I'd invest, several weeks into a project, and then I would lose interest. I'd be like, this isn't good enough, this isn't Runaway Highway, even though I didn't want to just remake that as something else. And that happened with 6 or 7 ideas. I'd get really invested, and then I'd be like, I don't know if I really like this anymore. I don't know if this is good enough anymore. And you can get your way with that kind of stuff. And probably the one thing I wrote in that time that I actually finished a script on and actually was really interested in doing, I wrote 90% of it in a notebook, and when I moved in 2017, I swore I grabbed every notebook I had, but somehow, some way, I left that behind, and when I moved in with my friends, I tried to find that and couldn't find it anywhere, so I ended up losing this whole script that I wrote, because I'd written it in a notebook and was planning on then typing it up on paper, because I like to go outside and screenwrite by hand. I feel like dialogue comes out of me more naturally. It works for me, and I like being outside. So, I wanted to take at least, again, 6 months off, and then, you'd spend a couple weeks working on an idea, then lose interest. What am I going to do next? Come up with another idea, lose interest. What am I gonna, time's passing, I gotta do, I gotta make another film. And, again, I'm sorry, I'm plugged up. That's gonna happen from time to time. I do sincerely apologize. And, so here I am planning on maybe waiting till the summer of 2016 before I start making a film again. Well, the summer of 2016 passes. And another thing that I admit has been a distraction towards getting back on making films and making more films, and I really shouldn't allow it to be so much, at least as much as I have, is in September 2016 is when I first started YouTubing, like, as doing this content that I do now. I didn't officially change my name to Steve the Amateur Story until the end of that year, but I started doing that, and obviously I've been very invested in this. And it is important to point out that I did do the documentary that I do, which is on my channel, by the way, called The Woman in the River, about an unsolved torso murder from 1946. I started working on that in like September 2017, and I was working on that clear through March, I think, into the start of April of 2018. So it's not like I wasn't doing anything like bigger film project stuff. I was doing that, and I obviously was producing a lot of content for my channel. In just a little over 4 years, I've produced like 750 videos, and that doesn't include 20, 30, maybe even 40 some videos from my old channel that I never reposted to my current one. So I've been going pretty hard over the years for my YouTube channel, and that takes time, and in many instances is taking time away from screenwriting. So that was another thing that kind of made it take forever. See, that this is how in-depth the backstory is. I'm almost 12 minutes in, and I haven't even started talking about my film, but don't worry, we're finally getting there. This is the backstory leading up to it, because one of the things I've talked about is how rusty I was as a filmmaker by the time I finally started shooting on this film. So, 6, 7 stories are coming and going and not working, and finally 2018 starts. I haven't shot anything in over 2 years, and I'm starting to get real annoyed with myself for not getting it together. And finally being like, dude, stop letting your ego get in your way. Like, you're at a point now where it's been so long, like, you need to just make something to, like, just so you could say you made something again. Even if it's horrible, just do it. And, randomly in this mix, and honestly, when I first got the idea for this film, I wasn't remotely as invested as I was in all these other ideas I'd come up with and then abandoned. This was more like, I randomly got the idea, and I pulled out, I was on my, I went on my 15-minute break at work, and I pulled out my iPhone and turned the audio recorder on and just started spitting out as much as I could of this idea that I suddenly had. And that voice recording sat on my phone unlistened to for probably at least 2 or 3 months. But it would have been tail end of 2017, start of 2018. Was when the seeds were planted. And some recent films I've had, despite being completely different from, they always had some inspiration from some other film, some tiny little inspiration. Runaway Highway, my last feature, I got my first inspiration of that from Wild, the Reese Witherspoon movie where she walks the Pacific Crest Trail as a challenge. I've only seen about 10 minutes of that movie, so obviously I wasn't going to rip it off, but I was theater checking at work, and I walked in, and I randomly was just kind of checking it, and like nothing insanely crazy was happening in the movie, but I was watching it, and I was thinking, I really like that idea of like this, somebody's got some rough past they have to deal with, and they have to go on some long excursion in an effort to kind of put the past behind them, face the reality of the world, and ultimately in the end, it's about forging a life for yourself and moving forward. Was kind of where my film was going in that vein. Well, in the case of Till I Found You, which again, up until about 2 months ago, was originally titled You Make Me Smile. And my inspiration for that film came from this random movie. I only saw it once. It was I almost said Michael Jackson. It was a Michael Douglas, Evan Rachel Wood movie called King of California. Now, again, I only saw it once, so I could be botching a few of the summary details, but the film opens like Michael Douglas is Evan Rachel Wood's father, and he's serving time for pulling some kind of a heist. But he hid the loot somewhere, so he's just waiting, serving out his time, so he can finally get released from jail and then go get his loot. And meanwhile, his daughter's just kind of surviving on her own. And there's this thing that just really intrigued me about how Evan Rachel Wood's character is only supposed to be like 17, 18 years old. And she's working at McDonald's. I think she literally was working at McDonald's. She's working a Mick job. And she's still living in their family home, which is a pretty good-sized house. And there was just something really gripping to me about, a girl who's like barely even, on the fringe of adulthood, working a McDonald's job, but she's living in this big house by herself because her parents aren't around. And that was the initial spark. And the initial idea I had, the idea that I recorded quickly during my 15-minute break, was different from what I ultimately had, because what I ultimately ended up with was a love story, when what I initially had was more of a surrogate mother type story. So my initial thought was I was taking that concept of like a young woman like living alone in this big house, and how bizarre that is to have a kid living alone in a big house by themselves, without some extenuating circumstances, like, oh, well, she has a rich uncle who checks up on her and pays for all the upkeep. So what happened would be, there's this character, the Susan character, which is the lead character in the film. She works for a kind of land use organization, and I don't even know if her type of job really exists in the world, but it's film, all right? It's a fake story. And essentially her job is she goes out and she's a property analyst, you could say. The land use business that she works for sends her out to analyze these properties they've purchased, going beyond just the general information. Where is it? How big is it? She goes more in depth into that, like, where is everything else around it? What kind of money can you get for it? What is it likely to be used for? She can go in and see these other little things that, the bigwigs might not see. And her character didn't change much. I came up with, her character works this job, and her job is essentially all she has in the world. She doesn't have a family. She doesn't have children. She doesn't have the nice 2-story white house with the red door and the picket fence. And thank you for your compliment. But I'm already getting tongue-tied, and I'm only 18 minutes in. But so her character was going to stay the same, or her character didn't really change that much over the course of the film. Even her age didn't really change. So she was this person who her job is the only thing that really sustains her, and it's at a point where that's not enough, and she goes out to check, the next property. And she was going to go to this property where this house was, and there was going to be this young girl. I originally saw Annette, who of course is the other character in the film, who's actually 20 in the film, but originally she was younger. I had her more like 14, 15, something like that. So Susan shows up at this house, thinking it's been abandoned for a long time. I still was maintaining that notion that Annette's parents are long gone at this point. And so Susan shows up at the house, and lo and behold, she expects to find nothing there. She finds this like teenage girl who's been living there and kind of doing her best to take care of herself in the absence of her parents. And there was definitely, I wasn't thinking about this at the time because it was a new idea, but there was definitely some loopholes in the idea, such as like, how would nobody know that she was potentially still living there? I would have to come up with some weird twisted thing where like the world would think that Annette also vanished with her parents, and therefore no one would think she would still be there. And so Susan meets her and sees that she's living on her own, and she's like, well, we own this property now, so you can't stay here. She probably has nowhere to go, and so it would be like Susan doesn't know what to do, so she's like, okay, I guess till we figure out a situation for you, you can just come stay with me. And they end up kind of forging sort of a surrogate mother-daughter bond, and that would be kind of how Susan would find her purpose in the world, was she would find motherhood. And that storyline was okay, but honestly, once I got to that general development point, I didn't really know what to do from there. Like the idea started. I wasn't completely losing interest in the idea, but it was starting to feel kind of boring. To be perfectly honest, like, okay, she's gonna be like, oh, you can stay with me, and then, oh, they end up, maybe the girl's a little bit distant at first, but then they kind of gradually learn to communicate. I don't know. It felt like a direction I didn't really want to go in, so I kind of put the story aside and figured, nah, I don't know if I'm gonna do anything with that. Like, I couldn't even get past the initial like outline phase before I was like, ah. And a couple months went by. Again, no films are getting made. It's getting, we're into like the start of spring, or, end of winter, start of spring 2018. And I finally started thinking, that idea, along with others, would kind of like periodically come back and go and come back and go. And I started wondering, what if instead of making it like a surrogate mother story, it's more of a love story? I felt like I could explore a lot more and have a lot more fun writing if that was more the dynamic. And so I started, contemplating these minute changes. Like, so obviously Annette is older. Her parents died a long time ago. And instead of living out of the house, she has been living with relatives for a long time, waiting for that opportunity to kind of get a little piece back of what she had growing up. And one of the main reasons that, by the time I decided to actually shoot this film, one of the main reasons I made that change was because where was I going to find a house that would fit that? I would literally need to find a house that we could spend forever making look kind of dusty and cluttered. And it would have taken so long. It would have probably cost a lot of money that I didn't have. And it's also important in the overall storyline because one of the thing that ends up being the catalyst to breaking the two apart, and of course, I'm saying this to you now, there's going to be spoilers here. I should have said that at the very beginning, but I think that's presumed. There's going to be spoilers, because late in the film, when Annette and Susan have their rift, it's because in that moment, Annette finally finds out that her childhood home has been demolished. So obviously, that element wouldn't work if she had still been living in the house when the two first met, only, a short while earlier. So yeah, so Susan didn't really change much. I didn't really have to change anything about Susan. I just had to make Annette a little bit older, but I gave her elements that one might look at and think are potentially almost infantile, but really what I was doing was, here's a girl who lost her parents at a very young age. She's been living kind of haphazardly with a family that she doesn't really want to have anything to do with, and she's been very focused on this one thing for her future. So because of that, she hasn't gone out and hung out with friends. She doesn't go out and party. She doesn't do extracurricular activities at school. She doesn't do any of this stuff. So I wanted her character to be a little bit, I don't want to say socially stunted. I feel like that's not really accurate and too easy of a way to pass it off. But I just wanted her to be a little socially different because she didn't grow up the same way that a lot of kids did. So if you see a lot of moments where Annette kind of reacts or says something, and you might be like, that was a little strange, that was a little interesting. Those are elements of her personality. That was how I wanted to write her. I wanted her to be different from your just run-of-the-mill 20-year-old, because she hadn't lived that existence. And so it also made it a lot easier to kind of develop the story, in terms of her, Susan being able to ask her if she wanted to go back to her place, which again, in the original story, hey, you can come stay with me till we figure out what to do with you. Well, in this case, Annette's a grown adult, so you don't even have to worry about that element. It's just like, you can come over and leave whenever you want. You're an adult. And so that was how the story became. I redeveloped the story in a new direction and actually made it a love story. And one of the things I like is that, and this is also something that can throw a film off or make you do characters incorrectly, and in an insensitive manner at the same time, was because the original story was a woman and a woman, it never occurred to me to change the sexes of the characters. I just made the one girl a little bit older. So it became a love story between two women. Initially, because it never occurred to me to change the sex of Annette's character just because I was aging her. It didn't make, that didn't occur to me. And as I started, I was, got about halfway through the thing before I really started thinking about the fact that, oh, this is a story about, a same-sex relationship. And, being a guy that admittedly voted down measures in support of same-sex marriage when I was younger, and I was an entirely different person, and being a person that watched late 90s and like early 2000s cinema, and there was still, there was, not that there isn't today, but there was, such a rift between people in terms of gay rights, and civil rights in general. And there were so many movies coming out, especially like the first decade of the 2000s, or this area like 1997 to 2010. There was so many movies coming out about that either had gay characters in them or had storylines that followed same-sex relationships. And you'd watch them, and you could just, as you watch the way that they were done, you could just see the film directors, like, you could just hear them screaming, "Look at me doing my gay movie! I'm so futuristic!" And it was just, there were so many movies coming out where you could just tell filmmakers were using that hot button issue as a way to, like, promote themselves and to make themselves look a lot more woke than they were. And hey, during this time, I wasn't woke at all. But I just got so tired of these films that were coming out during that time where it was just like, the film wasn't about people. It was about, like, look at the gay couple, look at the gay couple, look at me doing the gay couple movie. And they were just so disrespectful, and they so were using experiences of other people that, a lot of times they didn't have to experience unless, the given filmmaker happened to be gay, bi, trans themselves. And so I just got really tired of that trying too hard same-sex couple movies that just they made their characters less human sometimes. And so I was like, if I'm going to, and I did do a film a few years ago where one of the characters was lesbian, but this was the first film I did where it was like, that was a big element, was we have a same-sex couple here, or at least two women of the same sex getting into, whatever it is, because the rules aren't really set in the film. You can't really, it seems like by the end point, by the, leading up to right before they break up, it seems like it's a pretty solid relationship, but it's never really fully established. And I made it that way intentionally because I wanted that to be, part of the big issue. But anyway, as I started writing this, I was like, I'm gonna, I have a responsibility as just somebody who's trying to be a good person, someone who's trying to be good in the film that they make and not trying to exploit things. I have a responsibility to make these characters real people. Not that I'm the first person that's done that by any stretch of the imagination. I feel like films that deal with same-sex couples in the 2010s, it got a lot better. There's still plenty of, exploiting exploit work being done out there, but and you can write something good like that when you just don't even have that, like, oh, look at me and my wokeness. That stuff never came into it. I just wanted to write. I hadn't really done a love story before as a film, and I'd always wanted to do that. But most of the films I've done I've done a few just straight comedies and a lot of like drama thrillers. Um, and and so, in addition to wanting these to be normal character, realistic characters, I also I really wanted it to be kind of an undefined relationship between them. And one of the big reasons for that is because both of these characters don't have much of a past in terms of relationships. They both have pretty much never really been on dates, had anything stable. They've both been kind of on their own. And they've both had those things to distract them from wanting a relationship. Susan with her work, Annette with wanting to achieve this goal of establishing her own home for herself. And I really wanted to get into that notion of what infatuation, and sometimes a lot of times it ends up not being as real as we think it is, and sometimes it is. But how when you meet with someone and you connect with somebody so deeply, you want so hard to just have your plans and whatever that is to just work, and it'll be okay. It'll be okay. And so, you have Annette who is so unwilling to be distracted against what she wants, and then she finds herself falling for Susan. And, when Susan asks her to move in, she's like, I don't know if I should do that. This is getting a little too serious, and I don't want anything serious because I'm not going to be here much longer. But then she ultimately agrees to move in anyway. And then, it keeps getting more and more serious, And then, it's that tension is always under the surface. Like Susan's always, and you can see that in Susan. Susan is trying so hard to keep her from leaving. She wants Annette to move in. On the surface, she wants Annette to move in because it's like Annette's leaving sooner and I want to be with her as much as possible. Under the surface, it's, the more selfish side is she almost is trying to convince Annette, like, we have something good here. Maybe you don't need that. Maybe we just need each other. And so they both are so attached to each other that they're trying to ignore the elephant in the room, which is that Annette is probably still going to leave at some point. And the catalyst that breaks that is when she realizes her family home is gone, and all of a sudden it, brings back the importance to her even more that this is what I want with my life. And that is where they have their falling out. And I wanted in that scene, they argue a little bit back and forth, and ultimately Susan says this horrible thing, like, well, at least my life doesn't revolve around the fact that my mom was a fucking lunatic. And that breaks it. Annette leaves crying. I wanted you to feel more sympathy for Annette than Susan at the end of that fight, because in the end, I wanted it to be Susan's job to fix that rift. I didn't want to just have Annette be like, what, this love is more important than this thing that I wanted. Because that's what movies do all the time. You know what, I realized I don't need that. And maybe Annette doesn't really need that. But it's what she wants, and she's suffered enough to get it. So, when they have that fight and Annette leaves, I wanted Susan to be kind of at least in the wrong by the time that fight ended. So that it becomes her responsibility to make the sacrifices to get Annette back. Because Annette has been making sacrifices her whole life, fighting to get what she wants. Whereas Susan's just been kind of accepting that her job is all she has and kind of just wasting her life away. She's doing the opposite. She's not taking, she does these little daily risks, but she's not willing to risk for the bigger, better things that she truly wants. So we already know that Annette is going to give what it takes for what she wants, but is Susan going to be willing to do the same thing? And ultimately she does, in dramatic fashion. And So that's, you know, the general, and obviously if you've watched the film, you know what happens, but that's kind of my little extra commentary into that matter. Now let's move over to the story behind actually trying to shoot this dadgum thing. So I started actually writing the script once I knew it was going to be more of a love story, and I churned out about a 45 page thing. I actually wanted it to be a pretty short film initially. It wasn't really going to develop too much. And then I started feeling like it didn't have enough substance to it, so I started adding to it, and I think I ultimately ended up with a 75-page script. And the film ended up being about 85 minutes, which makes sense. Usually, a page in a script equals a page in a movie, but the more dialogue you have on a page, the shorter that is going to be, and the more description you have, the longer it's going to be. So if you have a page where the full page is just description, that could be 3 or 4 minutes of a film, but if it's just straight dialogue, one page of a script could be 40 seconds of actual film time. So because there was a few montages and things like that where you can write the whole thing out in a few sentences, but it ends up being like a 3-4 minute montage, you can see how a 75-page script ends up being an 85-page movie. And so once I actually only had like the 45-page version done, and I started putting out casting calls for the 2 leads. I think they were the only people in the film at that point. And then ultimately I added this scene with this landowner who's all distraught because he has to sell the business that he took over for his dad. And then his girl left him and wiped him out. Now he's having to lose his business, and he's kind of blaming her for it. And the significance behind that scene is, you know, a lot about what I establish a lot of Susan's character based on things that are happening independent of her. Like, the opening credits are a succession of shots of boarded up, vacant, abandoned buildings. These are properties that are potentially going to be up for sale. These are the kind of places that Susan's going to go to. But at that point, you don't know yet that that's her work. So I'm giving you a little hint as to what she does. And this first scene with this guy rambling on about his girlfriend leaving him and how he's pissed. And then you realize over time that Susan's kind of despondent over not having, you know, any relationship in her life, and now she's having to listen to this guy bitch about losing his girlfriend, and it's kind of like, yeah, well, at least you had a girlfriend. And then I wrote a scene for one of Annette's. I wanted to at least and there was actually 2 scenes I wrote. I ended up having to cut one because I couldn't make the sound work. And that actually ended up fine because I ended up deleting another sequence in the film because it just didn't cut together right. There was actually a scene that I shot with Susan. Susan finds out that Annette's left from Annette's relative. And, you know, Annette's relative references catching a train ticket and leaving town to go to her property. So you know Annette has left by train. And, of course, I cut that scene so you don't necessarily know that detail anymore, that Annette specifically left town by train. And I have this scene where Susan's kind of breaking down, and then she hears this faint train whistle. And it's all in her mind. And she starts chasing this. There's an elevated railroad trestle in Oregon City that I always wanted to film some kind of chase because it's elevated and it runs for several blocks, and there's a gravel road next to it. It's almost like a French Connection thing where Gene Hackman's chasing the elevated train. And so I had her going down this side gravel road, chasing the tracks, trying to figure out where the train is, and ultimately realizing there's no train. And we shot it, and it just didn't quite work out. And one of the reasons it didn't work out was it was just too dangerous to have her drive as fast as she would have needed to drive. We needed her to shoot through this gravel road, but there were, you know, from under the trestle, there were side gravel roads where someone could pull out, and your view of them would be obstructed. And if you're just flying through here, you're asking for a car accident. So she could never go faster than like 25, 30 miles an hour through there. And I even tried to do a version where I sped up the film like 20, 30% to where it would be sped up, it still looked natural, and it still didn't look like she was going fast enough. And its pacing never worked, and ultimately I realized I should just cut the scene anyway, because if I'm going to cut the scene referencing the train in the first place, this scene might not make sense to people now. So I ended up cutting that scene too. But anyway, so I first started the casting process in like early April of 2018, and I got Amanda, who plays Annette's character. I got her real quick. I saw that I love working with actors who have a lot of theater experience, and she had that. She actually works for a specific theater. And she had that look that I wanted for Annette's character, that just kind of bouncy, and just kind of wide-eyed, ready for the world. And so she was on board right away. Boom. Like, in April. And initially when I wrote it, I maintained that age gap between them. So instead of being like 12 years apart, they were like 20 years apart. And I wanted there to be an age gap between the two. Primarily because I did want them to be coming from slightly different places in life. I felt like if they were both coming from the same place, I would lose the ability to address certain just making it more interesting and having there be certain distinctions between the characters. So I wanted there to at least be almost still a generational gap between the two. So you have the one character who's just turned 20. They're still, the world is opening ahead of her. She's pretty much the age of a college kid. Annette's essentially a college kid. And then Susan's that woman in her early 30s who's been through all that. And now she's in that you need to be responsible and have your job and your family and your kids. She's in that phase of life now. And I always wanted that, because I always wanted these characters to be coming from slightly different places in the world. And initially, I had that age gap larger. I think I had... Susan was like 40, and Annette was 22, I think was the original script. And then I changed them to 32 and 22. And one of the main reasons I changed it was, you hear all these stories about middle-aged women, middle-aged actresses, women who are like, 40 to 60, how it's so hard for them to find good work in film. And I've seen a lot of local actresses post that. I'll see that, I'm 47 years old, and like, I can't, even for characters that are my, like, it's not so much that people won't hire them because they're not good enough. It's just those roles just don't exist in abundance, especially in a more independent film place like Portland. And here I just written a character for like an early 40-something, and I thought, maybe I was a little naive, but I thought, a lot of these actresses were going to come out of the woodwork and be like, oh, finally, a character, a lead role for a woman like in her 40s. And I'd get very minimal response. And I was paying, but I wasn't paying a lot. I was paying what I could afford. All right, I paid, the leads like $100 for the whole production. So essentially it was $100 for six days of work. That was really all I could afford at the time. And, a lot of independent filmmakers with more money than I have pressure a lot of people to dedicate a lot more time to doing film for no pay. Do it for the experience. And I agree, too. I feel like some actors should mix it up a little bit. Like, obviously, you this is your career you're trying to go into, and you got to make money with it. But, if someone's like, we just don't have any money to pay you, but hey, I think you'd be great for this role. Can you come out and film with us for 2 days? And it's like, you don't have another project going on. You're not busy that day. Go in and do it. Obviously, if you have a paid gig or something during that time, then obviously that outweighs the other. Or if you have a day job and you have to work that day and make money, yeah. Or if, you're in a desperate financial situation, you got to make money, yeah. So, obviously, I don't think people should just be working left and right for free. And I've had a lot of people that have been willing to do that for my work, and because of that, I've reciprocated that in certain respects. I've worked on, multiple films for free as a way of, obviously if someone's like, hey, we'll pay you, I'm like, okay, yeah, pay me. And now I'm at a point where I need to get paid more for that work. But it was just, it was kind of surprising that I just really wasn't getting a lot of responses. The first ad I posted, I got like 5 responses. And most of them were just a little bit too old. Women that you could tell were like in their late 50s. And that was too bad. I didn't want to go that, I didn't want to go that far. And there was one woman who responded who actually looked a lot like what I was initially visualizing Susan as about 40 with blonde hair, not super long, but down to like, just below the shoulders, kind of straight blonde hair, kind of tired eyes, from the weariness of her life. And this particular woman fit that perfectly. So I responded to her. She responded to me. I responded back to her. Never heard from her again. Don't know what happened. If she quickly lost interest, she could have at least told me that. Like, if you say, listen, I'm sorry, this came up. And, I just wish I would have gotten some response. Sorry, what did that say? Where do you want to take your career from here? How do you want it to grow? Well, I mean, geez. Right now, I have another project actually lined up, but we've had to delay it because of COVID. But because COVID numbers have been so low, we've been slowly projects have been starting to spike up again. And if I was to do this film, like, I'd be very strict about it. Like, you need to be honest with us if you're going to come and work on this, and like, we have to know that you're not out partying and all that stuff. Obviously, people got to do stuff. If you're an essential worker, you got to go to work. If you got to go to the store because you need food, I obviously understand that. I'd be like, you people need to be responsible, because if people get COVID on my film, I'm going to go absolutely irate. And I'm not talking about just if I get it. I'm talking about if, because like, I'm the guy that runs the film. You people show up. I'm the guy that's in charge of this. I'm the one that has to make sure that everything flows well, But I am, and I'm even contemplating doing more serious documentarian work outside of YouTube, like taking my career that way a little bit. I already have some thoughts about some more documentary stuff I want to do. And I've been kind of at a point where I'm ready to transition, meaning like I'm still going to do my own stuff, but I want to work more with other people. And it's draining when you like, write, direct, and shoot your own thing. Like, that's obviously exhausting. Usually those are 3 different people. So I do want to get into working more on other people's projects, and I've been doing that. I've been doing a lot of sound for movies, which is interesting because that's not really my forte. But I learned to do sound because I'd worked with sound people who were literally people who had gone to college to do sound, and then I had this one movie I did. This one freaking guy. He seemed cool at the time. Maybe he's grown up. And just a brief side note, and it is film related. And I hired him to do sound for this film that I did. And the sound was almost unusable. I had to raise the gain on the audio. I had to max the audio gain in almost every clip. Except for a few scenes where the characters were arguing and yelling at each other, in which case the sound was loud enough because the characters were screaming. Yet the sound was almost unusable. And I promised to pay the guy, and this was years ago, this is, when I still didn't really have any money, and I agreed to pay the guy like $60 for his sound thing. So I mailed him a check. I did it the old school way. I wasn't using PayPal yet or anything like that. And like, I know I sent him the check. So he came back, and he sends me a message like 2 months later, and he's like, hey, like, am I going to get paid for that? And I'm like, I paid you. And he's like, well, I didn't get it. And I'm like, yeah, you did. Like, what are you saying? It got lost in the mail? Like, I've sent things that have been lost in the mail. And he was trying to scam me. He was totally trying to scam me. It was like, I literally still have the checkbook that, when you write a check, there's the extra page under it. I don't know what that's called, but it's like your kind of receipt. It shows that you wrote that check. Like, I still have the thing that has his name on it, $60, dated with my signature. Like, it's not like I thought I sent him the check and then just forgot. And I remember going to the post office and sending it. I remember the specific post office I went to when I sent it. So I learn one of the reasons I mean, obviously, I wanna be well-rounded so that if somebody's like, "Hey, we're hiring for this," or "We're hiring a gaffer, we're hiring, we need a sound guy, we need an extra camera, we need a this." I'm, more capable of taking up that stuff. So, I learned sound, 1, because I felt I needed to, but 2, I was like, there might be some projects I do where I have to do some of my own sound. Runaway Highway, I did half the sound on my own because I had a sound person for a while, but that didn't work out, and because of all the scheduling conflicts, it was like, we're filming today, okay, we have to film today. Do I have a sound person? I don't have a sound person today, but we have to film today. So it was like I had to go. So I would literally, if somebody was sitting in their car, I literally gaffer taped the boom mic to the steering wheel and had the mic face them, plugged it straight into my sound mixer, hit record, and just let it go as I did my thing. If there were characters standing outside, I had an old broken tripod that, like, the, thing that you'd use to, the handle that you'd use to, like, move the camera, it just was broke, so it would just fall sideways, so it was useless. I would put my boom mic on my boom pole and then tape the boom pole to the tripod and then just have the mic pointed at my actors and have it record as I film them. I just had to make sure the microphone was pointed the right direction, that the audio levels were right, and that, of course, it was recording. That was literally, maybe about 45% of Runaway Highway, I ended up having to do the audio for it because of how scatterbrained the scheduling became. And by the end of November 2015, my lead actress was like, I'm not going to be available again for a long time, so we have to get it done by the end of November. So it was like, whether we had a sound person or not, we had to film those days. So anyway, yeah, I want to, I obviously want to continue doing my own stuff, but, as far as my personal stuff, I'm still in that, like, trying to get my stuff into film festivals, trying to do, and obviously stuff like that has been so stilted by COVID-19, but I have another project that hopefully we can possibly start doing at some time. Unfortunately, a lot of it takes place in one interior location. We don't have to go around to a bunch of places. We don't have to, like, try to get a store to let us film in there and hope there ain't COVID in there. And fortunately, COVID is very hard to catch outside, especially if you're staying away from people. So, sorry I'm just playing with my hair so much. I can just feel it tickling my face. So, hopefully and I have a friend who's acted in a lot of my stuff who's really interested in being in this film, who I think is probably still on, and she's actually acted in, like, another project since then. So obviously she's being safe, and she's kind of getting more cool into acting again, and we're all trying to be smarter about how to live in these times, trying to still live our lives without being totally stupid. So yeah, things are a little bit stilted right now, but progress is hopefully in the future. And anyway, as I was saying, so again, the biggest issue I started having was I had this one woman who was expressed interest, and then she just disappeared. And then another woman replied who actually had a pretty extensive acting resume, and I was kind of interested that she would even come act in something so small, or at least something with such a small budget. I think I spent maybe $400 or $500 total on the film. And same thing happened. We started a conversation. There was, like, a little back and forth, and then she just disappeared. I messaged her. I tried contacting her any way I could, and she just vanished. And, if you're not going to reply to, 1 or 2 efforts on my part, I'm not going to break my neck to try to get you, unless you're, like, a, like, super hard to get renowned actor. I should be kissing your feet for even considering being in this tiny film. Like, there's a local actor named Patrick Green who is, like, he's a local Portland actor. I think he's still just primarily a Portland actor. I think he, goes to other places for stuff, but he's probably the most renowned actor in Portland right now. There was a British award show a couple years ago where he was nominated for Best Performance for a local indie film he did here. And when I say Best Performance, he was going up against, like, big names. Like, I remember Bradley Cooper. He was running against Bradley Cooper when he was in A Star Is Born. Like, that's who he was running against for this award. Like, he's a very, very high demand actor, not just in Portland. And when I met him once when he was just starting to kind of really blossom for another film. And I remember I met him at a Starbucks, and within 5 minutes of us sitting down, I was discussing my film, and I went like that, and I knocked my venti drink into my lap, spilled coffee all over myself. I was like, because I was all burning and sticky. And I excused myself to the bathroom, praying he would still be there when I came back. And I finally came back. I wiped as much off as I could. I just stank of, I don't know. I don't remember what kind of drink it was. It was probably a white chocolate mocha. That's my go-to. And, I wiped down the seat best I could. And the floor, my feet are sticking to the floor because there's coffee blotches. And I was just like, okay. So anyway, as we were, and I think, I could be totally wrong, but I think I garnered some respect from him for just, like, dealing with the embarrassment and then immediately coming back and being like, okay, anyway, so, film. We're talking about my film. And I ended up delaying that film, ended up using completely different actors, but I think he was briefly on board for that. And he ended up agreeing to be in Runaway Highway, and by that point, he was in heavy demand. And he said, I usually don't do little things like this, but I really liked the scene. And so I met with him. I literally met with him in a store driveway, like a Safeway parking lot. Got in his car. We drove to a spot. He's doing this long phone call with the lead. And, just like other stuff in the film, it was just me and him. I strapped my boom mic to his steering wheel, so it just pointed at him as he did it, and then I filmed him from a few angles, and that was it. We were done in like an hour. So, and now he's really blown up, and I'm always like, I'm like super grateful that, like, this big name, he actually agreed to be this little part in this film that I did. Anyway. So, the film ended up getting delayed. And one of the reasons it got delayed was because I couldn't find, you very rarely, I don't think I've ever had, trying to get into doing a film ends up getting delayed because I can't find someone to play the lead role. Like, you think that's the one that people be coming out of the woodwork for. And I just couldn't find anybody because the people I would reply to would vanish and the others just didn't fit. And I kept posting and reposting the ad. And, and Amanda's being very patient as April becomes May, becomes June, becomes July. And finally, it's like, and it was good because it gave me time to really polish the script. And that's how it became it went from like a 45-page script to a 75-page script. And there was a lot of things added into the script that weren't there. The scene where they're drunk and they're drinking together and talking about their wedding, that wasn't part of the original script. The scene where Susan rips off the guy that's waiting to score some drugs, that literally was a scene I wrote for one film that I decided not to do. So I co-opted it for this, then co-opted it for that, and it was this scene that I really liked, but it just never quite made it into a film, and I realized it kind of fit into this film. And the original context was I wanted to do a film about YouTube. Like someone who's sort of like a YouTube star, because obviously I'd been doing YouTube, and it's like this young woman who does a prank channel, and she's getting really big, but there's like this one guy out there who's watching, who's like kind of a stalker, and he's horrendously sexist, and he's like got this like mental rift where on one side he's like twistedly attracted to her, but he's also so sexist that he's like enraged by the fact that she's this confident young woman pulling all these pranks, and most of the pranks she does are on men. And it would kind of become this thing of her and this guy and that kind of coming to head. So kind of like a thriller about a very real thing. Some certain YouTubers getting stalked. And one of that scene where Susan steals money from the druggie was originally like a prank she does. where she's like, I'm gonna be really risky and I'm gonna find a druggie in this kind of rundown part of town, which is why I picked. It's called, I think it's called like the Grand Avenue Historical District, and it's all these warehouses on the east side of the river from downtown Portland. And the reason there's so many of those there is there's the railroad lines going through there. So wherever there's railroad lines that go back, a long time, there's going to be these old warehouses around there. So I ended up filming it in the same place, even though I co-opted it for a movie that I did like 2 years after I first came up with the scene. And I was able, because I was just like, would that scene work for Susan? And then I thought, okay, well, instead of doing it as a prank for her YouTube channel, as was the original intent, she's doing it because she's trying to impress Annette's character. She gets done saying, like, I need to take these risks, and Annette's like, well, they're not really that risky. And Susan's like, and she sees the guy, and he sees him kind of like standing against the wall and kind of like looking around, and she's like, I bet that guy's a tweaker waiting to meet his dealer. And she decides, okay, fine, you want me to take a risk? I'll do this. And it's incredibly dangerous. What if the actual druggie shows up at that time? But it shows under the surface the lengths that Susan was willing to go to try to impress and keep Annette around. So that wasn't in the original script. I co-opted that from another idea. And so that delay, trying to find a lead, actually allowed me to extend the film and to build it more. And ultimately, I finally decided, you know what? I'm gonna expand the age. So instead of, I think I said I want someone like 38 to 45 years old for a character who's about 40 years old. So I decided to make the character like 30 to 40 years old on the casting call I did. And within 24 hours, I already got, more responses than I had, when Susan's age was originally higher. And Carrie, who plays the lead in the film, like, she responded within 24 hours. And I looked at her, and, she didn't have the straight blonde hair. She had the curly black hair, but there was, there was just something about her that looked right. So I was like, all right, send me, record me a little audition video. And she did it. And I could hear the kind of the hesitation in her voice and things like that. And I thought, that's good, because in adjusting the story, I wanted Susan to be someone who obviously knew how to communicate. She had to know how to communicate for her job. So when it came to technicalities and details and things like that, she was really good. But when it came to the language of love and romance, she was very inexperienced. So I wanted somebody that was going to kind of have, not a super soft voice, because those are a pain in the ass to record properly on audio. But I wanted somebody that there was just that little bit of like hesitation to them that would really transition well to some of those experiences with Annette, trying to express how she feels. Like when Annette's like, why did you kiss me? And she's like, oh, well, and she's kind of like flustered because this is all very new to her. And so I could already tell that she was, definitely in the running. And then she sent me, because we were conversing on, I think we were emailing each other too. And so I emailed her, and she sent me back this really long email that looked like, and it was, I can't even recite what it was, but it was like, she was going so much into like how she felt the psychology of her character was and how good it was for film. And I was like, oh, damn, like I'd never gotten that kind of thing before from someone who was interested in being one of my films. I've had people who have just, been really excited, been like, please, I want to be this character so bad, but she sent me like this really long thing, like going in depth about her feelings about the character, and I was like, oh, you're in. And so by August 2018, I finally had my lead, and I was able to set up a meeting with both of them, and I met with them in like the Alphabet District. I think it's the Alphabet District. It was like, Northwest 23rd. It's the backside, that little area between downtown Portland and the West Hills, that little area. And here we are. It's August. It's the end of August 2018. I haven't had a film shoot with actors or like, a meeting with actors since November 2015. It's been almost 3 damn years. And I'm like, this is exciting. You're finally making a movie. Like, this is happening. Like, you've cast your 2 leads. We're having a meeting. Like, this film, this is when I officially realized this film is happening. You're doing it again, Steve. And so I sat down and I waited and I started getting... I'm one of those people, maybe you can identify, that's really nervous and really antsy when I'm meeting people for the first time, no matter what the circumstances are, whether I'm meeting new actors for a film or I'm just meeting new people. I sit down and I wait and I'm very... It's kind of, kind of tense. Let the alarm pass by. So yeah, so it's natural for me to feel that way when I'm about to meet some new people. And it had been a while since I'd shot a film where I was having... Everybody in the film were actors I'd never worked with before. It had been a long time. I don't even know, aside from like my earliest films where everybody you're working with for the first time, my last like 3 or 4 films were either predominantly or exclusively people I'd worked with previously. So here I am. I haven't done a film in forever. I'm working exclusively with people I've never worked with before. It should be okay. These seem like decent, responsible, intrigued actors. And the whole meeting, my foot was in my mouth the whole meeting. I knew how to answer their questions. I knew what questions were coming. But every response was just, oh yeah, I felt like I was just like that the whole night. Just blah, 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 blah. Like just nothing of any sense was coming out of my mouth. And I remember the meeting ending. And I was like, thanks, great to meet you. And we were still like, okay, like we set a date. We set September 17th to begin shooting. Gave us like, 20 days for me to finish getting prepared and for them to be prepared. And somehow those 20 days weren't even enough. Like I still was kind of behind on some stuff. And really had to kind of rush those last like 2 days before we started shooting. But even though we'd had the meeting and we had set a date to begin shooting, we'd actually kind of set a full schedule because they both were good to film on Mondays and Wednesdays. And I was trying to fit it into a 6-day shooting schedule. So we were like, for 3 weeks, we'll do Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday. And we'll be good. But leaving that meeting and walking back through downtown, I had to go through Chinatown towards the Max. It had gotten dark. There were sketchy people all over the place. One of them was following me for a couple of blocks. It was not fun. I'm just glad that when I finally got to the Max stop, the Max was there like 2 minutes later. And I was like, get me out of here. Because I felt like I bombed that meeting so bad that I think it's still on this channel. I don't know if I maybe hit it or whatever, but I posted a video on this channel where I literally discussed how badly I bombed in my own mind this meeting. And I literally, before I even got to the Max, I was checking my phone to see which one of them was going to contact me first and say, you know what, I'm going to cut and run. Because I felt like I just stuttered and stammered so much. I was like, they're going to think I don't know what the hell I'm doing, even though I just sent them links to previous work and all that stuff. So the next day, I sent them both an email. And it was under the guise of, oh, it was so great to meet you. Thank you so much for doing this project. But really, it was a way for me to sneak in a little, by the way, sorry if I sounded a little scatterbrained. I was just really excited and haven't done a film in a long time. But anyway, thank you so much for doing the film. And because I wanted to get that response. If one or both of them were going to bail, I wanted to know now. And they both replied like, it's fine. No, you sound like you're genuinely like just excited and invested in the film. And they had no issue. And that was where I immediately thought like, okay, well, whatever else happens, I feel at least moderately comfortable with these actors now, because if they can deal with me under those circumstances, hopefully they can handle me as a director, because I'm a pretty easy director to work with. I'm not someone who's gonna scream your ears off because you messed something up once or twice. I'm not someone that's gonna do 40 takes of the same shot of you picking up a glass of soda off the table. I'm one of those guys that I know what I want going in. And I'm very, very focused. When that camera starts going, I'm very, very focused. Because when a take is done, I know not just whether I'm going to use it or not, but I know how much. I know, like, that's going to be the main shot I use. And I even, like, when I film, like, you know, I'll be standing. I'll have, like, the camera on the tripod. And I'll have the little, you know, viewfinder out for me to watch to make sure it's right. I hit record, and I'm like this the whole time. I'm like a football coach on the final play. Just come on, come on. And I'm just like, I'm so focused on that one take. And usually by the time it's done and I go home and, like, you know, I download all the footage I took, a bunch of the takes I don't even remember doing because I was so into them in the moment. And then you get it done and you know what you're going to get from it, but then you have to go, boom, get ready for the next shot you're going to do. And I would forget very quickly. So I'd have to go through these clips and kind of, I'd be like, I don't even remember shooting that thing. I'll shoot like a cutaway and I'm like, I didn't even remember that. There's cutaways that ended up in this film that, like, I don't remember ever shooting. So we're scheduled for Saturday, or September 17th to start. Our schedule is very simple, September 17th and 19th. Then the next week, September 24th and 26th. And then the next week, it would be October 1st and 3rd. And we had very few snafus in terms of scheduling. The one thing that changed was we had a day where we were just shooting Susan's stuff. And we were going to shoot it on a Wednesday. She became unavailable. We shot it the next day on a Thursday. That was like the biggest scheduling issue we had, which was amazing to me considering Runaway Highway, we had 18 canceled shooting days. And I even made like a little meme for it. Like, here's the tale of two films. Runaway Highway ended up being about 93 minutes. My first rough cut of, had I not wanted to cut a bunch of stuff out, or cut out what I did, had I left that all in, Till I Found You would have been about 91 minutes. It ended up being 85 minutes. Essentially, you have an 85 and a 93-minute movie. There's not a whole lot of difference between there. It took 17 days to shoot Till I Found You. It took 178 days to get Runaway Highway done. It's a tale of two different films. And so the first week, first Monday and Wednesday was a lot. I wanted to get all the hard stuff done out of the way. Get that done, and then, you know, as we're working longer and maybe getting a little bit more tired, like, I know Amanda was doing, like, a theater show around this film, so it was like, I wanted to get the most demanding stuff out of the way, not necessarily just acting-wise, but in terms of getting to a location. So the first day was all of the, I guess you could say, rural exteriors. So all of the stuff that was, like, you know, Amanda's old property that Susan drives out to, and there's the gate there that says do not block, which we ended up blocking. And most of what we shot that day was in that one little spot, because we actually walked down a gravel road a little ways to film the ending scene where the two are reunited. That was literally that place that Susan stops with the gate there. We walked maybe 500 feet down that gravel route, and that is where we filmed that scene. So it's literally right around the corner. So pretty much everything was filmed in that little stretch, and that road is, you'd think, because we were out there between, like, these. Now, if you're not from Oregon, you're not going to have any idea what I'm talking about, but essentially Oregon City is kind of really where the Portland metropolitan area ends. It's kind of where, you know, it starts getting real rural. And Oregon City is already far enough south of Portland. But if you go directly south of Oregon City, you eventually come to a town called Malala. And then if you go off east, there's Estacada. And whose house did I use? That's actually an interesting story. We ended up using the house that my sound person lived in. That was my crew. I had a sound person. That was my crew. Because half the film, we literally couldn't have more people. Like, when we were in the car filming, we'd have Susan driving, Amanda in the passenger seat, me in one of the back seats, my sound person in one of the back seats. Initial, because one of the things I've always had the hardest time with is finding homes to use if I need to use a home in a film. I've always ended up bumming like some friend's house out of desperation. Initially, we were going to use my girlfriend's grandparents. They live in a mobile park, and they have one of those classic old school mobile homes, and we were originally going to use that. Initially, it was that was like my backup. Like, if I can't find anything, we'll have that. But I started thinking, what an interesting dynamic, and I almost kind of wish we still did it, but it was going to become kind of complicated because I would have had to force my girlfriend's grandparents to, like, leave all day for several days, and that would have been kind of rough on them. But I thought, because Susan's character in the early going is she's this woman that's hit her 30s, and she's beginning to kind of realize that, she probably doesn't have much of a future beyond her work. She's probably not going to have a family. And so she's just, this is who she's going to be from now into her old age. And, like, living in a mobile home that, the mobile home that, your grandparents are always living in, like, having that be her surroundings constantly, I thought that would be a really interesting dynamic. But it was starting to become more and more of, like, a complication. Like, I felt really bad about having to ask her grandparents to leave. They would have had to be gone all day for 2 days, and I was just having a hard time ethically doing that. And so while I was talking, because I think one of the people in my film asked me about, what were we going to do, because the interiors are half the movie, and one of the actors asked me, like, so do you have something set for a house? And I was telling them that was kind of my idea, but I didn't know. And my sound person was like, you can use my house. I was like, really? And she was like, yeah, why not? And it worked, because I thought, whatever kind of a place Susan lives in, because she lives alone, I didn't want her to live in a big house. I didn't even want her house to be 2 stories. I want her to either live in an apartment or a small house, something that's not, she's living by herself. She's not gonna, and I felt like if she had a big place, that wouldn't make sense to her character, even if she is well paid. So it really worked out well, because the house we used was technically a 2-story house, but it was a one, like, little attic room above the house. So it felt very much like a small 1-story house. So I got lucky. My sound person and it made it easier for everyone, because you missed it. I still have the film on YouTube. I just have it unlisted now. I wanted to give it that little 10-day run, but I didn't want it to just be, I didn't want to just, like, make a film and then just leave it on YouTube for an extensive period of time. I just don't like to do that. So I could, for anybody who missed it, like, it's still up and it's unlisted, so I can send you the link if you want to, like, request that, like, even in the comments of this video. Because honestly, I can say I'll send you a link at the end of this live stream, and then the live stream will end, and my brain will be 50 degrees somewhere else, and I'll totally forget. But yeah, I'm totally cool, like, for anybody who missed it, I'm totally cool sending the link so you can have that opportunity to watch it. And what was I saying? I know I was talking about the first day of show. Oh yeah, no, I was talking about the house. So that's how that worked out. Was literally my sound person, and it made it easy because she lived. They moved shortly after, a couple months after the film got done, but that house like, from here, I could walk to that house in, like, 25 minutes. It's, like, right up the street. So, she was able to come and pick me up with all my film equipment and take me there. Actually, no, she gave me rides home. I got myself there, but again, it wasn't that far to go. And it was a nice midway point for most people because Susan, Carrie, who was playing Susan, lived in, I want to say Camas. She lived in Washington, right across the river. And Amanda lived on the west side. I think Beaverton. Again, I'm pulling back for some old information there. And so that house was kind of a perfect place for them to travel equal distances. And it was real convenient for me because it was right around the corner. But yeah, as I was saying before, so the area that we filmed on the first day was this area kind of between Oregon City, and if you're going south, Molalla, and then Estacada's kind of off here, and it's just this very rural area, some farmland, some parks, but a lot of rural space, and you'd be amazed in an area like that how few places there are you can go to that have like wide gravel shoulders that you can pull off to so you can stop your car in a certain area and film at a location, and B, being in an area where there isn't a car going by every 30 seconds. Like, you know, that's a nightmare for an independent filmmaker when you're out there, all is quiet around you, but there's the occasional car, and you'll be filming, you know, one take and there's no car audio in the background, so you're like, great, perfect. Then you do the next take and like one or two cars, they don't even have to be on the street you're filming on because it's so quiet out here in the middle of nowhere that you can hear a semi-truck a half a mile away and it sounds like it's right around the corner. So then I'm like, okay, there's a perfect place to do an edit from the good take to that take where there's a semi-truck, and the moment you do that take is when there's that frickin' semi-truck in the background. So you go from a cut with no sound to cutting to a shot where there's suddenly a semi-truck in the background. And you either have to do a different cut or you have to play around with the audio. That's, if I'm ever, you know, pretty much any situation I get into, I make sure to get general ambient sound of the area in general, but also like get it to where there's a few vehicles in the background in various places so that if you hear it in one take and it's like you got to deal with it, you go from one take or one shot where there's, you know, no truck audio, splice in the next shot and there's truck audio, you can add, kind of fade in some truck audio in that last clip. So instead of being like and having the audio, you know, jump like that, you can have more of a and then, you know, it syncs. Sometimes, you know, you're stuck doing stuff like that. You're stuck dealing with that, especially when you're doing something this small. Well, it's where it's like you, the director, cinematographer, your sound person, and your actors, and that's it. And so this spot was actually a spot that this stretch of road is a stretch I used heavily in Runaway Highway. There's like 3 or 4 significant scenes I film along that stretch of road. One of the big climactic scenes is literally filmed, you know, 50 yards down the street from that place where it's Annette's old family property, where we see Susan pull in and there's the gate there. And I knew we were going to be doing a lot of video along the side of a road, and I knew that there was those little pull-off spots there where you'd have like a little gravel road that was a little kind of, nature was kind of slowly overcoming it, and that was what I wanted because the idea was nobody's really done anything with this property since, you know, Annette's family died, and so this property's been kind of just sitting there little done to it over the last, you know, 15, 16, 17 years. So I wanted something where you still could see like there was like some kind of gravel road to get into something. And I knew that was there along this road, but I also knew with all this shooting we were going to be doing, and it was going to be very quiet aside from vehicles and planes, because I hear a plane flying overhead. That was actually a bigger issue than vehicles, was occasional planes flying overhead. There was actually some guys, I kid you not, as we were about to film, actually no wait, I'll get to that story, because actually that's kind of a significant moment in this thing. but it's in relation to some people that went skydiving out of a plane while we were shooting. But I knew I wanted to use that stretch of road again, because when we filmed there for Runaway Highway, on 2 different occasions, probably spent a grand total of 4 hours along that road, 4 or 5 hours, and I think 2 vehicles went by the whole time. And we were just far enough away from adjoining streets that you couldn't hear vehicles from far away. It was the only area I could find in that whole massive area that you could film for a prolonged period of time and have little to no interruptions from planes, cars, that sort of thing. And, sorry, back's tightening up. And so I already knew we were going to film there on that day. Even though I was reusing, not the same location, but reusing a stretch of road, because I was like, if I try to pick something else new that I don't know very well, problems are going to happen. And I really liked the look out there, and it ended up working well. And we got out there, and it was great. Someone had been using that particular area that we have Susan Park to like dump their trash, and there was trash that had been there for I don't know how long. And it's late September, but you know, late September is usually still kind of the end of summer, you know, especially in Portland. And there were just yellow jackets all over the place because they were just like feasting on this trash, and there was old tires left there, and I loved that look. And there were shell casings. Like I had a shot down by Susan's feet where she's kind of like digging her feet into the ground to see what it's like, and there's a shotgun shell casing sitting on the ground. Those were all over the place out there. And because it's very rural, I'm guessing a lot of people kind of went out there to just do target practice or whatever. It was a little unnerving when we first arrived, but we were like, this is some good cinematic backdrop stuff. But because it was still so hot and there was this garbage all over the place, you know, we did have to deal. There was a couple of takes we had to redo because a yellow jacket would float up and buzz around the boom mic. There was some audio clips I had where it's like fine, and then just like, and my sound person's like, hold on, hold up, we got a yellow jacket. And I'm really nervous because we finally start shooting, and I'm really nervous. Haven't done this in forever. And I was just really nervous, and really a great time for my confidence to suddenly be shaken. And I was doing it, and I was doing okay, but I was just feeling very, very unshaky, very uncertain about my directorial abilities, because I haven't done a film like this in 3 years, and I'm working with brand new people, and I'm out here, and it's the start of the project, so everything that has to get done looms ahead and not behind us. And I was so stressed. And about an hour in, I was wearing my kind of neon yellow running shorts that I wear in a lot of videos that I do, especially during the summer. One of those yellow jackets got up under my shorts, bit and stung my thigh. And so I had these 2 like little swollen spots on my legs. So we still got several hours of filming to do. I'm trying to get my head in the right place, and now my leg is burning and throbbing, and I am just horrible pain. And I'm glad he only got part way up the thigh. It would have gotten worse if he would have gotten further up. So I'm having to fight through with this yellow jacket. Thank God I'm not allergic to them. I've got this bite and a sting to deal with. And I just had to forge forward, and we filmed for a couple of hours, and because, again, the big climax at the end of the film was the 2 coming back together, was going to be filmed at that location, and I was starting to have a panic attack, which I very seldomly have. Yeah, I have done some of that. Just a little bit. But I've met and known some people that have worked definitely at a higher level than me, that have brought me on for some small. I haven't done a lot of it, and I do want to do more. Like that's the thing, is I want to One is it's extremely exhausting when you're trying to do a lot of it on your own. You're trying to be the director and the cinematographer and all that stuff. It's incredibly exhausting and it's incredibly time consuming. And so, yeah, I do. That is something I want again. And I kind of touched on this earlier. That is something I want to do more of, is getting into working on other people's stuff, whether it's higher up local indie stuff or even working with people that might be more at my level, expanding, developing even more connections with people and all that. I'm very, especially now, because we've barely been able to go anywhere the last several months. But yeah, I definitely am at a point where I want to work more with others. And, and I can still do, that's the thing, I can still do my own thing. I can still do projects like this. These labors of love, even as I'm working on other stuff, because I know I can do it. If I can do all the shit that I've done on YouTube and then be doing a film on the side, I can be working on other people's film projects and still doing these things that I do. And obviously, for myself, I want to grow as a filmmaker. I want to get to that point where I'm going to be someone that is well known enough and well recognized enough for my work that I can actually start getting grant money towards my projects and start making, bigger and better things. And so there's a lot of stuff I'm working towards in that regard. But my first day panic attack, which again, I have maybe 1 or 2 panic attacks a year, and they're very brief. Because it's still the first day, and I feel like things are going okay. They're not going fantastic. I think I was being a lot more critical of how things were going than I had to be, because what I was getting when I watched the footage later and edited, I realized that it actually wasn't too bad. But I just felt like it wasn't going very well, and now we're going to have to do the final scene, and I made such a big deal about wanting to do a really good job on the final scene. And I just started, oh man, the birds are coming. I was so nervous and so panicky, and I could feel my mouth opening, and I was about ready to say, guys, I can't do this today. And I've never, even when I was first starting to do film, like I was getting myself worked up. I mean, that was the long and the short of it, because after this moment, this never happened again over the course of the film. And trust me, this was an easy shooting day compared to what we had to do 2 days later. But this is when I said I was going to tell a story about people that were skydiving out of a plane nearby. Right when I could feel my mouth opening and I was ready to say, guys, I'm having an episode here. I can't right now. We started hearing a plane, or we heard a plane pass over real quick. So we had a 2 or 3 minute delay, and then one of the people that I was working with noticed that they could see off in the sky, these like skydivers kind of slowly coming down. And there was a helicopter that started circling in the sky, and I think they were probably with the skydivers, like watching them to see where they landed, probably so they could pick them up or whatever. But because that was going on, there was a helicopter in the area for about 15-20 minutes, so we couldn't film. So we were just kind of standing there hanging out. And that 15-20 minutes I had, like, cleared my head out. I was still kind of like not feeling super great about this first day, but like the panic attack faded. And I was like, when the helicopter went away, I was like, all right, let's do this. And we filmed the ending scene. And honestly, the ending scene is not as great cinematically as I was hoping for. I would think I was shooting a little too much to the stars for that. And I didn't know what kind of, how exactly that location was going to look and how certain shots would look. But considering where I was at leading up to that scene, I think it turned out pretty okay. And I was just like, okay, we're like 2/3 of the way through the day. Let's just move forward and get it done. And we pushed through. The ending of the shooting day was a lot of little things there's a brief montage in the film where the two made love, and then Annette took off, and there's that period where they're separated, but they're kind of both looking for each other, and there's moments where you see both of them back out there. And that was mostly how we finished the day, was just shooting those shots. And then I finished with some stuff with Susan, and then she drove me home. And a lot of that stress kind of faded with the acknowledgement, hey, first day done. We only have 5 shooting days left, and you're getting a feature-length movie out of this. Like, usually it's a lot harder. And I'd find out how hard it was Wednesday, September 19th, 2 days later. This was the day that we filmed all of the stuff kind of surrounding when Susan rips off the druggie, where they're checking out the building, and Susan starts talking about her life. Then she rips off the druggie. They run back to the car. They can't get a... What the hell? I think like a branch or something just landed on the roof and scared the hell out of me. And, you know, they can't get away, so they have to run from the car, then come back and put gas in the car. And it's what, is it even 10 minutes in the film? That took longer to shoot than everything we shot on the first day. And we shot about 15 pages, well, 12 to 15 pages on the first day. This, page-wise, was one of the shorter days. But, you know, first of all, this was us shooting. I never really shot in the city. You know, something that's really a gritty part of Portland. I'd never really filmed that in a film I'd done before, so I really wanted that. And in fact, there was a murder that happened at the spot where Susan's car's parked, where they get in and try to get away and then can't, have to come back and get the car. Right at that spot, like, I think like a month after our film, someone got murdered at that exact spot. Freaky. But I thought I was prepared, because I knew, okay, this is probably going to be the hardest thing. Because we're gonna be dealing with the elements. We're not gonna be out in the middle of nowhere. We're not gonna be inside the house where we have control over everything. We're gonna be outside. We're gonna be surrounded by buildings, vehicles, people. But I forgot about the trains. Again, this is an old town area. Lots of warehouses, because there's a train line that goes through there. And I thought, you know, the train line doesn't get used that often anymore. I was very wrong about that. There was a train that came through about every 30 to 45 minutes. And I went out there. I have a vlog video on my channel where literally I was location scouting, but also like showing off the area. Because I picked like 10, 12 different locations to film at. So I was preparing myself in case the first location we wanted to use didn't work. And of course, the first location I wanted to use for where Susan rips off the druggie was this building that had been fenced off for like 2 years, had graffiti all over it, hadn't been used for anything. I go out there, it still looks the same. I'm like, this is where we're going to use. And this was like a couple days before shooting. We show up to shoot. There's a big construction crew there. They've started renovating that building. It's been sitting there like that for like 2 years. And like the week we want to film, we go around the corner and they're doing construction. So I'm like, well, I'm glad I had a backup plan, and we ended up filming up next to another building. But we ended up postponing like one pretty significant length scene and then 2 short ones because we couldn't get done before nightfall. Now again, it's the end of September, so it's, you know, it's not getting dark super early, but it's like, you know, it's getting dark at like 7:30 around here. And the trains, there's a vlog I have on my channel, like day 2 shoot, and it shows my despondency over the freaking trains that we had to deal with. And it was my own problem. That was the one thing I didn't take seriously enough, was how many trains go. And these are there was like 2 Amtrak trains that came through, but otherwise is these big cargo trains. So it's not that you can't film when they're passing you by because they're loud. You start hearing their horns, you know, a mile, 2 miles away. You start hearing the vibration of the tracks before you can even see the train coming. So you got to stop shooting long before the train gets here, and you can't start again until it's long past you. We lost probably 75 to 90 minutes just having to stop and wait for trains to come through, because every scene we shot was at least within 2 blocks of the train tracks. So we literally ended up having to postpone stuff, which was fine. We were able to just bump it to the next shooting day, because the next shooting day was going to be the shortest shooting day we had. So it was going to be all Susan, and we just asked Amanda, hey, can you come out and shoot to get this, one scene done with us so that we'll be able to take care of what we were supposed to do today. But yeah, if you want to get a vibe for what that shooting day was, you'll have to go a little ways back in my channel. But yeah, if you look up like day 2 film shoot, trains, you'll see that a lot of what I videoed of us while we were on location shooting was how many times we had to stop because of a train passing through. And I mean, I was actually surprised at how well things went otherwise, because we were filming in an area that had a lot of, random workers in the area who I could totally see some of them being like, hey, in the middle of a take, because people do this. Hey, what are you doing? Making a movie? Like literally in the middle of a take. And I just have to be like, cut. Dude, what the fuck? But it's not just that there was a lot of workers in the area. There's a lot of homeless people in that area. And so I was actually surprised that nobody really asked us what we were doing. Not in like a suspicious way, but just like, hey, what's going on? Can I bother you? And it seemed like we were there forever. But we got good. I mean, what we got was solid. I actually was surprised at how well it came out. When you're, doing a film for a couple of $100, it wasn't like I could pay the city to block the streets off so we could drive through here unabated. The only potentially bad thing we had was there's a scene where there's a shot right after she's ripped the druggie off and he realizes it. I film him sprinting across the street after her. So the first take of getting that shot, he turns and starts running, and he can't see around the corner of these vehicles in a building, but there's a car coming down the street that he's going to have to run across. So I'm like, car! And he's still running. And both me and my sound person are like, car! And you see him go like, and barely stop himself. I still think the car would have passed him before he made it, but still, it was like, because of course the moment I said action, I look over, there's a car coming, and I'm like, car, and I'm like, he's running, car! Probably the closest I've ever come to almost killing one of my actors, but we still, we handled it the way we had to. It was like, car coming! And he laughed it off. He thought it was hilarious. Maybe he had a death wish, I don't know. That was by far the hardest day, was trying to get that done. That was a nightmare. And I felt so incompetent. I kept saying, like, I'm sorry, guys, I should have prepared for the trains. But, we were able to take 5 days off, which is good. We needed it, because that Wednesday, working down by the warehouse buildings, that was exhausting. That was as exhausting as it gets. And we came back and we filmed. We had a day that was mostly just going to be little Susan bits that we filmed in kind of the Albina area of Portland. And one of the things we were going to do on that long day downtown was we were going to film the long scene where they're sitting in Susan's car and they've just met, and Annette won't drink the coffee because she hates black coffee, which that's a take on me because I hate black coffee with a passion. I'm one of those little bitches that has to pour a bunch of milk and sugar and flavoring in it. I can do black coffee, it's just I don't want to. So that scene, which that's like a 5-minute scene, that's a pretty chunky scene. That was going to be how we finished that day, where we had to deal with all the trains. And I remember even the very last thing we shot that day was Annette at a payphone calling to inquire about a property. And of course, there's railroad tracks near there, and we drive there. We're quite a ways away from the warehousing district we were earlier, and the moment we get out of the car, we hear a freaking train coming. We're like, we can't get away from these trains. And so we ended up having to bump that long scene where they're discussing, and Annette tells her this horrible story about how she lost her parents, and Susan says, hey, maybe you can come home with me. We ended up having to bump that to the following Wednesday, and that was the primary big thing we shot. It was that and a lot of little things. And then the next Wednesday was just a Susan day. We ended up not using half of that stuff because that was when we shot her chasing the train stuff that I ended up cutting. And then we drove out rural stretch right on the border of where the wildfires were hitting. I think like the Riverside fire that was endangering Estacada a few weeks back. It was like right along the river and right the areas that we were filming in, because we were filming the montage of Susan trying to figure out what property Annette bought, knowing that that's the only way she's going to actually find her. And filming her driving along and stopping off. And literally, we just picked random spots to stop. And, like, if there was a random gate or a random fence that we could pull off, we stopped and had her check it. Like, here's another property that you can look at and be like, nope, ain't here. And yeah, we were right. The areas that we were filming in were right on the fringe of where that fire was. And I will tell you right now, because, you know, if you're doing a little independent film like this, where it's very small and everything's on you and you got to be prepared for everything, be prepared for everything and think all the questions through before you just go out and start filming, and don't just automatically think everything's going to be okay. I'm saying that as a young filmmaker who's made his share of mistakes and done his share of stupid things. You know, filming for one film I did, one of my friends, I mean, he kind of screwed up his stunt, but he ended up face planting into, you know, a kitchen floor and almost gave himself a concussion. But just think everything through before you just go ahead and do it. Because here we were driving in these rural areas out towards Malala and Estacada. There are some bona fide rednecks. I mean, real deal rednecks out here. And we were just stopping in front of little gravel drives and like, oh, this will serve as another property she checks. And a lot of these places there was nobody around, so it was fine. But in one case, and you see it briefly, there was a little gravel road. It looked like one of these gravel roads. There was no houses out around. It was just a gravel road that went up into some trees. So we had her stop. We had Susan stop her car there, and I sat in the backseat, got a shot of her getting out of her car, and then cut away to some other stuff, and then cut back to her like as she's walking up the gravel drive. And she got up there, and then she paused, and I noticed she was kind of like staring off, kind of intrigued like. And she came back to the car, and she's like, someone's coming. And I'm like, what? And what happened was that gravel road actually did lead up to somebody's house, and the woman that lived there was coming down the drive. So, of course, she comes around the corner. I'm standing there with a camera with these other 3 random people, and she was actually really nice about it. Initially, she was kind of skeeved out, which I can totally understand. But again, I just assumed that this was a gravel drive that didn't go anywhere. And she was like, what's going on? I was like, oh, sorry, we're just filming a movie, and we just needed like a little, you know, gravel entryway to film at. And she was like, so you filmed it in my driveway? And he was like, I was like, oh, we're just using it like, you know, as like a spot that my character could stop. And we didn't realize this led up to somebody's house. And she was kind of like, oh, okay. But then she warned us. She said, just so you know, there's like some crazy people out here that will shoot you. That was all she said. And then she, like, you know, we moved our car and she was able to leave. And all of a sudden I was like, Steve, you didn't think this through very well. Fortunately, that was like one of the last places we stopped at. So we were kind of able to live in ignorance, I guess, at the other properties. But there was like a really sketchy barn that I ever stop at. And she walks out and looks at it. And it was this real sketchy, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibes. And who knows if some weirdo could have been there. And so, yeah, know what you're getting into in all its facets before you just go out and start shooting like that. Because you may not get someone so nice as this lady we encountered. You might get a gun pulled on you. And again, as the writer-director, the guy that's running the ship here, that's my responsibility to know. Now, obviously, in a bigger, you know, film production where you got a lot more crew, you've got, you know, the responsibilities are disseminated amongst many people, and you have, you know, so issues at hand are more easily dispersed. And in that case, like location scouting, you know, you actually have people that are doing that and are, you know, when you have the money to have a location, or people do location scouting. But this was guerrilla filmmaking at its finest. And that was how we finished the day. So that was the simplest day because it was just real quick. And I was still, because I was still working like 8-hour shifts. Almost every day we weren't filming, I was working like an 8-hour shift at work. So I was feeling pretty wiped out at this point. I'd agreed to work on another guy's film. He was doing a 4-minute film for like a film contest, but even it being only 4 minutes long, he said it was going to be like 10-hour shooting days on a Saturday and a Sunday, so it was going to be a long thing. Because it was a short film, but it was being shot at multiple locations. Hey, can you not bring it down? And so now I knew that was waiting me around the corner, and I was finally starting to feel real wiped out by this project. And I actually called Victoria, who was my sound person, whose house we were going to use, because all we had left to shoot were the interiors in the house. And I said, hey, can we like postpone, just like, can we bump the shooting schedule a couple of days instead of shooting like on Monday? And she said that, to this time, I can't remember exactly what it was, but for some reason, something, her and her husband were like gonna go out of town. Something was gonna happen wherein suddenly her house wasn't gonna be available for a while. So it was like we had to do this now, or it was gonna be indefinite when we would be able to get it done. So I was like, okay. And I worked my shifts through the weekend. I hadn't had a day off between working and filming in like 2.5 weeks. And I knew this was going to be rough. We had about 35, 36 pages of interiors to shoot, and we had to get it done in 2 days. Which just doesn't happen in normal film. You know, in a big Hollywood production, you're getting a couple pages done, usually. You're not getting 15, 16, 17 pages a day done. And it was pretty simple. We were going to shoot most of what would have been stuff with both Annette and Susan that first day, trying to get as much of it done, and if any was left over, Wednesday was going to be all the interior stuff with just Susan, and then we would try to cram whatever was left with Annette in when we could. And we even had to cram in, the last like scene we shot was with the relative who shows up and is like, who the F are you? Where's Annette? Yeah, when she showed up, we were, again, you're trying to shoot 35 plus pages of script in 2 days. Like, it's hard. She showed up at 9, or no, it wasn't 9 o'clock. It wasn't quite that. She showed up probably at about 7:30 to do her stuff. And we were just starting to shoot the big breakup scene where Annette leaves. So she sat in the kitchen and watched as we did that. And then we finally did that scene right after of her barging in and saying, where's Annette? Where is she? Let her know if she doesn't come home, we're going to burn her little trailer down. And yeah, that first Monday, because that was going to be the bulk of stuff, because the longest interior scenes were obviously going to be stuff with both Susan and Annette in them, engaging, having dialogue, things like that. We shot probably about 20 pages, 20 to 21 pages that day, because we filmed, there's a multiple minute long scene where it's they're at Susan's house, and it's like the first time they've seen each other since their first night together. I had to film the scene where they're drunk together. That's several minutes long. There's the sequences in their bedroom that I had to shoot, which, by the way, because, you know, it's hard when you don't have a lot of resources to shoot a nighttime. Oh, my battery's down to 20%. So I may have to rush. I brought a cord out here to plug in, but it's not quite long enough, so I'm going to try to... I mean, I'm getting pretty close to the end, and I've been rambling for almost as long as the movie is. So I should be able to get this finished before the battery dies. But the way that we did, literally the way that we did those nighttime shots where they're in bed together, and I wanted it to be like really dark, like there's not really any lights on, but also you can still see the characters, is Victoria, whose house it was, she had one of those, those little like lights, they're circular, you set them on your end table or whatever, and you just push it and it's like a white light. We took one of those, and there was a ceiling, little ceiling fan with a light in the middle of the room. We literally, I think I gaffer taped that little push light to the ceiling fan and had it shine down on them, so that, if you're looking at it in person, it's a really bright light. But of course, if you're using just that one little light to illuminate a whole area, it's going to be very dim lighting. And that's literally how I lit those sequences where they're in bed together, but trying to make it look like it's, you know, almost pitch black in the room, but you can still see the characters. And so, yeah, so there was, you know, multiple kind of lengthy sequences. So, yeah, it was probably about 20, 21 pages we shot in about 13 hours. And then the day in between that, I literally, you know, between this 13-hour shooting day we had Monday, October 1st, and what was like a 14-hour shooting day, Wednesday, October 3rd, that Tuesday in the middle, I had to go to the west side of downtown because there was a show in the Culture, which they still have their episodes up on YouTube. I was the sound person on that, so I had to go to work, and then after work, I had to max it all the way from, you know, 82nd to the west side of downtown because we were interviewing the guy that runs the Portland gear store. So I had to just go and do that gig and then get home, you know, by like 8, and then hope I had enough strength to wake up and finish this film the next day. And it was pretty easy because a lot of it was just Susan stuff. And we got that done, and then Amanda showed up and we filmed like them breaking up, and I filmed the scene where they've first gone back to back to Susan's place, and Annette starts kind of making the moves on her. That was the bulk of what we shot on that second day that was left over from the first day because we just ran out of time. And so we filmed that, and so yeah, it was like 14 hours. It was like 9 a.m., or I think it was even a little bit before night. It was like 8:30 to 10:30, something like that. And the very last things we shot were Susan when she fills her glass of water and then decides to leave and go for a walk, and she buys a bottle of water and returns with a bottle of water, which the purpose of that scene is her and Annette have gone their separate ways, and Annette, or, you know, Susan is realizing, like, you know, she's, you know, in the back of her mind, she's realizing, you know, if I really do love Annette the way I think I do, I have to be willing to make sacrifices for her. And in the end, she does make that sacrifice by giving up much of her life to go be with Annette in this very rural situation. So the purpose of that scene, because you may watch it and see her fill the glass of water and then, like, not drink it, then leave, walk for a while, then come back with a bottle of water that she obviously went to the store to buy. What that was showing was Susan kind of beginning to train herself on how to deal with a potential life out in the sticks, where everything you want isn't right here. You may have to walk a couple miles to get it. So she has the bottle of water, she opens it and takes a drink and says, not bad. She's not talking about the water. She's talking about how it wasn't really that big of a sacrifice to have to walk to the store to get some water, even though in my cushy, cozy current lifestyle, I have water right here at my beck and call. So it was almost like a test of herself. But a couple shots I got of her walking down the street, those are the very last things we shot at the end of the film. We got that done, and I was like, we did it! And I was so exhausted, I couldn't think. I don't eat much on film shooting days because I get so worked up. And people make fun of me, like, Steve, you need to eat something, And, like, I eat a little bit between, but I can't have, like, a meal. If we take, like, a 30-minute break so people can eat, I can't have a full meal. I literally can't. It's just my stomach is like, no, you bastard. Don't even try. So that was, you know, the day down by the warehouses dealing with the druggie. That was the most stressful part of the shoot in terms of just shooting a film and all the issues that can arise while it's happening. But the most exhausting stuff was getting those 2 interiors done. Wait, sorry, I had to read this. No, stay on, comment. Where did you say your videos often? Did you develop character traits or dialogue based on people you know? Because I do say bougie a lot. Do you have traits or dialogue based on people you know? there's definitely not specific people. You know, like some people will write dialogue for a character and be like, you know, this drunken guy that I wrote his dialogue for, he's based on this guy Murphy I used to, you know, walk by, and, you know, I'd see him at the bar sometimes. I feel like the dialogue I write is like this correspondence of like all the different ways I've heard people talk in my life. And, you know, I work a job at a theater where I'm constantly hearing, you know, conversations whizzing past me. You know, riding on the bus, you hear conversations. Walking through the store, you constantly hear people talking. And I feel like I've gauged a pretty decent perspective on just the way people talk and how people talk based on who they are or their life experiences and things of that nature. And I almost just kind of have that in my head as like sort of a guiding light, because when I start writing dialogue, it pours out of me. I honestly am in like another realm when I just start writing. It's like I write a line and immediately my head tells me this is the next sensible thing for someone to say after that. And it just like I write dialogue like a lunatic. Some dialogue that I've written for some scenes, literally I'll be at work and I'll duck into a corner for 5 seconds because I start having dialogue, and I pull out my pen and I just chicken scratch what I can get of it on the back of like my cleaning schedule. I love writing dialogue. I mean, if you've seen my work, you can tell I'm someone who loves writing dialogue. There's a lot of talking in my films, but hey, Quentin Tarantino has a lot of talking in his films too. So does Hitchcock. So I'm not. I don't feel like I'm treading negative ground in terms of elite directors, but yeah, really, when I actually start writing the dialogue, I really don't know where it's coming from. I always make sure before I start writing, like, do you know these characters? Because you gotta write based on how these characters are gonna be. You know, you can't have Susan start talking in some random bizarre fashion or start talking like she's this type of a person when she's this type of a person. You know, I can't see Susan, you know, how her character is. I don't see her like driving to her next meeting site and listening to hip hop on her radio and singing with hip hop. Like, I could write that kind of dialogue. I could have had her singing random hip hop songs throughout the film, but it wouldn't have made sense to her character, at least in my mind. That's just an example. Yeah, the character dialogue just comes out of me. It's always been that way. I trust myself to come up with good dialogue, and the best part is once you get done writing a whole big old thing, you can go back and look over it, and anything that doesn't work, you can fix it. That's why I try never to censor myself when I just start going, because it's not like you're writing a text and you send it and it's like, great, whatever I did is gone, it's out there and I can never get it back. You know, once I get it done, it's there for me to mess with as I please. So I don't have to worry about making it perfect on the first run, you know. And yeah, in this film, yeah, I definitely had a lot of fun writing Annette's dialogue. Again, because as I discussed earlier, she's not socially developed the same way that everyone else is. And I feel like because she's been so tunnel vision on her objectives, things that push another direction are very threatening and very discomforting to her. And even though she's very outgoing in the film, I feel like she's definitely has some introverted qualities, because that's kind of how I am. I am definitely an introvert. I have an incredibly hard time talking with people I've just met. But when I'm sitting here and I know people are watching me, but I'm also by myself and I'm not as worried. But so that's why you have these moments with Annette's character where she's fine and then all of a sudden she switches. And she, you know, because of her difference in a social development, again, I don't want to say stunted because I don't think that's fair, but it's just a different type of social development. Like, when Susan tells her that she loves her, she's obviously discomforted by that because, like, I don't have time for love, I have a life. But she also wants to be nice about it, so she says that's nice, but she says it in this, like, I could give less of a fuck kind of way. So you think nothing's going anywhere, and like when she asks her if she wants to move in, there's kind of this like, But she kind of wants to because she has feelings for Annette and she can't deny that. So I really had fun writing her character and how, you know, I don't want to write somebody, so many movies out there, you have the same people saying the same exact dialogue. You can almost tell when somebody says something, you know what the person's going to say back to them before they even say it. And I don't want a movie that's full of that. You know, if people are arguing, they need to get something done, and someone says, you know what, we'll deal with it tomorrow. What's the other person going to say back to them? There is no tomorrow. I think that's a Rocky 3 line. But it's just like, when you know what a person is going to say to the other before they say it, that's shitty dialogue writing. I'm sorry, that's my perspective. Not that I'm the world's greatest dialogue writer, but at least I'm trying to be different, you know, without going just haywire nuts and making something that doesn't make any sense at all. But yeah, so I got that final day done, and then I had to do 2 8-hour shifts at work for the Thursday and Friday after we finished shooting. Then that Saturday and Sunday, I had to do those 10-hour shooting days for this other film I was helping this guy on. And by the end of that Sunday, by the time we got done, I had the worst back pain I've maybe ever had in my life. And it was because I literally had not rested for like more than 3 weeks. And again, like I was talking about earlier, when I'm videoing, I kind of crouch and get focused, and it pulls on your back. It does. And then I was doing this sound stuff, and there's a lot of this, and there's a lot of this, and I was using my back muscles so much. I got home. I was scheduled, back to work. I had to call out of work 3 days in a row because I literally could barely get out of bed. My back was in so much pain. And it was just I'd overstrained it. I hadn't, torn something. I hadn't slipped a disc or anything. Because after, 3 days, I was able to kind of start moving around again, and I was okay. But I legitimately threw my back out, just exhausting myself between the film I was doing, work, and then doing this other project right on the heels of it. And it was kind of like Runaway. And this is one of the reasons. Doing a lot of YouTube content definitely affected it. I also had a brief period a while back where my Mac was having some issues. And for a couple of months, my Mac wasn't really working. And I got that figured out. So obviously, if my Mac isn't working, I can't be on there editing. And it was another thing like Runaway Highway. I was so exhausted by the time I was done that I just had to put it aside for a while. I'd edited a little bit as we were shooting, but I just needed to put it aside for a while. And there ended up being more than usual, and I really don't know why, but there ended up being a lot more random little sound issues than I was used to. So that adds to your editing. Hold on, I got a question. God, I hate how it'll show the comment, but for like 5 seconds. So hold on, I have my hand on the screen so I can see it. As you're writing and filming, do you feel like you're living with these characters, and do you miss them when it's over since you put so much into it? I don't really miss the characters when I'm done. Well, also, after filming it, I usually spend so long editing that usually by the time I'm done editing, I'm like, I don't want to have anything to do with this film anymore. Go away. But I do get very much, as I'm writing and fleshing out the characters, I'm very much like, it's very interesting because I'm obviously have my eyes open and I'm watching what I'm doing because I'm writing the dialogue by hand or typing it. But visually, I'm not even really seeing what's in front of me. I'm visually seeing what's happening. And yeah, when I envision my characters and whatever scene I'm writing and the dialogue as I'm doing it, I'm literally seeing in my mind how I envision the whole location appearing, how the characters look, how their hair looks, how they're dressed, how they stand during a given line. Does someone put their hand on a hip when they say this line? Or, if a character has this line and this line, do they kind of look off when they say, I see the whole thing on film in my mind ahead of time. Or not ahead of time, but while I'm writing it. And I think that helps is because it's in my mind, I'm kind of watching a movie and the dialogue is just kind of coming out of that movie. So then it's coming out of me and I'm writing it out. And even when I was a little kid, I've always had that. Like when I would lay down to go to bed at night, if I couldn't go to sleep right away, I would, close my eyes and I would create my own, like movie. Because, when you close your eyes, you can see with your mind whatever you want. And I literally would, I remember there was times I was, 10, 11, 12 years old. I would make full movies in my head. And what really sucked is a lot of times when I would be going to bed and just thinking that way, I would come up with dialogue because there was no pressure. I would come up with dialogue that was better than dialogue I come up with in, my general, like, I'm going to sit down and write something state. And I hate that. I still feel like I do good dialogue, but I always feel like it's only like 60, 70% what it is I come up with when I'm just not worried about remembering it. Because I'll be like, oh, this is so good dialogue. I got to write this down. And then that'll happen. I think of dialogue when I'm in the shower. And then I'm like, okay, I got to hurry and get my shower done so I can write this dialogue down before I forget it. And then I always only end up remembering like a little over half of it. And then I have to stop and be like, oh, what was the part after that was really good. What was it? And I usually end up not recovering it. Excuse me. I am really starting to lose my voice. Which is fine, because I made progress. But yeah, so a lot of things came up in this film that ended up delaying it from getting done, and some of that was my own stuff. I'd start working on other stuff, and I'm like, the film's there, I'm gonna get it finished, and my battery life is down to 10%. So we're approaching the end here, everybody, because either I'm gonna end this myself soon, or my phone is gonna end it for me. I could plug it in, but I'm outside. And what's the point of going through all that when you're pretty much at the end anyway? I'm sorry, this whole thing, I keep looking this way because I'm used to having the camera on this side of my phone when I talk to it, not this side. So I'm used to looking this way. So I keep looking at the little button on the bottom of my iPhone and then realizing, nope, that's not the camera. So yeah, if you see me kind of glancing off like this a lot, it's old habits and they die hard. Much like the fact that I need to start saying like, share, subscribe, all that stuff at the start of my YouTube videos, seeing as everybody sees the start of your YouTube video, but then when I say it at the end of the video, when only like 5% of the people are still watching, nobody's gonna like and subscribe. That's something I really am trying to change, and I'll go out and vlog and completely forget it. But yeah, and another thing that, in all fairness, dragged out how long it took me to get this film done was I literally Henry David Thoreau edited this thing. Because Henry David Thoreau was known for writing, rewriting, and rewriting, and I am not a writer, rewriter person at all. I hate having to rewrite something. If a video I edited gets lost or gets screwed up, I hate that I have to sit down and re-edit it. I hate it so much. But I literally, the version that I put up on YouTube was probably the 8th or 9th cut that I had done, because I would, get a cut done, and then I'd play it, and I'd watch it in depth. I don't know why I had to add the Lee. And literally everything that didn't look right, anything where the sound was kind of odd, or and some color correction. There was certain moments where, again, it was especially the interiors, it was very rush shooting, and some of the lighting for the interiors was not perfect, and some of that was because we literally didn't have a choice. Like the scene with the relative when she shows up, that was right at the end of our film shoot. We literally only had 20 minutes to shoot all that, and it came out a little bit red because we were relying on just interior lighting at that point, and it was just, we were strapped and we had to get we had to get it done. So there were certain things I fixed as best I could, but couldn't make look perfect. So, each time I come out with a cut, I'd find 40, 50 more things that I wanted to fix or adjust. And that was good because there was, it wasn't until the 6th, 7th time that I realized that train chasing scene just needs to go. And little things like that. So it took a long time to cut, but it was, you think about it. I've just got this cut of this film done, like, end of September, so I could post it on my YouTube. And the scenes of this thing, not even including, like, the initial recording I did talking about it, but just the initial sitting down and starting to write the script goes back to, like, February 2018. This is, like, 2.5 years getting everything together. But we did it. In the end, that's what matters most, is we got this thing done. And I think that's about all I've got. My throat is getting very hoarse. My mouth is getting very dry. I knew this was going to be kind of a long video because I would get very, very in-depth into stuff and get off on a few side tangents. That's just my way. So yeah, that is the story, the big jumbo story behind the making of Till I Found You, which was originally known as, the working title as we were filming it and as I was editing it was You Make Me Smile. And essentially the reason it had that title, before I go, was, and it still happens in the movie, but I just felt like it would be something that people would miss really easily, and I didn't want to waste the whole title of a movie on something that was kind of hard for some people to notice. But when we're introduced to Susan, you see how just kind of bland her life is, and she's just kind of like, the first time you see her smile in the movie is when she first meets Annette. When she hears Annette stepping up and she turns and sees her, she goes, "Hi." The first time she smiles in the movie is when she sees Annette. So there's a connection there that Annette invariably brought a smile out of her in a life where she doesn't smile. But because smiling wasn't like an overarching theme to the film, that people might not catch that is where it came from, I decided that that title was too narrow. And I was kind of trying to dabble with doing kind of an oddball title that wasn't too crazy. And I thought, You Make Me Smile, it's kind of fun to play with. And it just didn't work. But Till I Found You is about as perfect of a representation of what this film is about as I could conceive. Because both these characters were going in certain directions, and some of it was good, and a lot of it was bad, but till they found each other, and they didn't even realize it necessarily while they had it. It took them coming apart and having to come back together again for them to realize that their lives are different and better as long as they are together. It wasn't until they found each other that they realized how much better life can be. And that's, the overarching, I guess, concept, the drive behind the film, and kind of why I went with that title, ultimately. So that is it, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. Those of you that did, I appreciate it. Hopefully I think I covered just about as much as I could, honestly. Thank you. Thank you so much. And, hold on, I'm adjusting you. And, yeah, I have another film project, again, that's lined up. Hopefully we'll be able to do it at some point soon. I'm going to have to try to get the ball rolling on that and just keep in touch with people, keep track of things, keep track of everything. So, again, thank you so much, everybody, for watching. And this fun little backstory on this film that I did. And, after I do my next film, I might do something similar to this. And, as always, remember to like, share, subscribe, Patreon, all that fun stuff, which of course I'm remembering to do at the end, but this is a specific live stream for a specific thing, so it's not a big deal. I don't really care too much. But, all that said, as always, everybody, my throat is dying. Till next time, everyone, this has been Steve, the Amateur Historian. I'm trying to get my thumb out of the way. See ya!